Rise of the Deadman. Chapter 1. The Return of Anton Schritz. The two men were told by the governor himself to visit the forest. Their questions were few, for they knew exactly what they were doing there. Few weren't familiar with the rumors surrounding Anton Schritz, a deadman. His possible existence would bring turmoil to the entire world. Their entire world. Together, the men advanced through the brush. The forest was untouched. No tree trunks would be found there. It was the last remaining natural forest in the entire world. Their entire world. Anyone who was found in the forest would be arrested on the spot if they were caught. While there weren't enough soldiers in Winterloan to prowl every inch of it, setting foot in the Landsman forest was not a crime many would dare to crow about. No one would dare enter without protection or a death wish, making it the perfect hiding place for Anton Schritz.
"Maybe he's not in here. We would have seen him by now. He would stick out from the monotony," said Garth Malloy.
He was the second commander of the night force in the capital city, known as a chief.
"I concur. Maybe we should turn back," said Jonathan Iglesias, a security man who worked closely with the governor.
Both he and Garth were unfamiliar with the forest.
"No, the governor wanted us to do it. Us! Think of the honor this will bring your name. And yourself," argued Garth.
Jonathan argued further.
"Still, if the rumors are true, he is a deadman, and you know what they can do."
He wasn't far off. Almost everyone knew of the legendary rebellion 500 years before. Since it was so long ago, few scraps of information remained readable that told tales of battles fought by millions on either side, purges of government leaving citizens to starve under poor leadership, and blood-curdling, bone-chilling accounts from those who met the truest of enemies, the ones the good people of the world joined together to defeat, the Deadman. The legends of the Deadman were told to every Wiseman-fearing child in Winterloan, but there was not a report of one being seen since the end of the Deadman Rebellion. It had been nearly 450 years since the last of them had fallen, but now the story of Anton Schritz returning from hell as one of them fell on the ears of all who lived. His story wasn't a pitiful one. Some would describe it as a tragedy. A man who... But those days were behind the two gentlemen looking about the forest. Their mission was serious, and it could mean everything to the security of the world. Of their world. Garth didn't know much about Jonathan, aside from what he had heard from the other men and women around the capital. Jonathan was born 27 years ago, nearly 28. He would be cheerfully celebrating in 3 days' time if everything went right with their mission. The trouble was that Jonathan would likely be celebrating it alone. His tenacity to share several women in his life had left him with none as of 2 months ago, or so the rumors flew. This was a problem that Garth did not have. He had been married 2 years previous, and now he was about to have his first child. In fact, similar to Jonathan, a celebration might be in order by the time he got back. However, there were those close to his wife, Ilya, who had warned her against childbearing. They feared her slender body would not hold up to the terrible pain from childbirth. Garth could only hope that they were all wrong. Otherwise, Garth's life was far from an exciting one. He had been born just outside the capital 34 years prior, and had been raised by his father, who once rode with the Mainmen, before their banishment. However, his father, Pontius, had remained loyal to the governor, one of few. Since then, Garth had wanted for nothing, and being a loyal knight to the governor served yourself and your kin well. Pontius had retired from his post 9 months earlier, and because of his track record, the bloodline of Malloy had been well trusted. However, Garth had held a terrible secret, something he knew that, if dispelled before the governor, could lead to his own banishment. For he had been in contact with several Mainmen in the recent past, and had even spoken with some who had abandoned the cause or retired from it. He was afraid that Governor Slank's absent-mindedness on the throne about an enemy as powerful as Anton could lead to the downfall of the capital. If that were to happen, there would not be a force in Winterloan that could stop him. About 20 minutes had passed since their search began, and the forest ran for 2,000 miles. They knew they couldn't search everywhere, but instead get as close to the border of Gildren, which lied along the Enden River, as possible. The river acted as the border between Verk, a country favoring the capital and its gains, and Gildren, a country with no leadership and few inhabitants who lived there in spite of swamplands and other perils. At least the governor had told them that if they weren't back in 2 days, there would be 300 men waiting at the capital to assist them.
I say this is entirely a task of danger. Have you heard the stories? Asked Garth.
Yes, I have. Such stories of the Deadman taking a little girl south of a farm cottage and burying her alive. Then of a barn catching fire and horses aflame running out with eyes of red. Very disturbing stories are these, answered Jonathan. Garth went silent for a long while. Jonathan, too, did not speak one word. He loudly caught his breath as he took a look around the forest. He saw little life in the trees. No leaves, no birds, no small critters. Perhaps Anton had killed them, he thought. No, he wouldn't go so far. But still, the fog around them was chilling. The sky was a dark gray, almost a light black, and the slight wind that had picked up after they had entered the forest was becoming stronger. He would give anything to be anywhere but here at this moment. As time slowly passed, a noise caught their attention. It sounded close, perhaps 20 feet from them. A twig had snapped. The pair snuck behind the nearest tree that would hide them both, and looked ahead, not focusing on anything behind them. That was when two pairs of hands grabbed and dragged them by their heads along the ground. When the pain finally stopped, they were before the presence of a figure with a haunting image. The two surmised the figure to be a male. He was cloaked in black, a black as drab as a cloudless night, and with a hood that covered his face. They couldn't make anything of his countenance, but instead feared his height. He could have been 6 or 7 feet tall. They were too frightened and surprised to decide. This man was... No, this was not a man. This was a Deadman. The Deadman, Anton Schritz. His feet were bare and his hands were black, perhaps covered by gloves. However, nothing else of his skin was shown, instead preferring the black cloak. This was worse than any description they had overheard from other men at the capital who had claimed to have seen a Deadman, be it in their dreams or when awake. Never in all their lives had Garth or Jonathan been this afraid. They didn't even take the time to notice that they had reached the edge of the Enden River, which flowed along, ignorant of the evil that stood before it. Finally, he spoke.
Well, who comes to me? A pair of spies from the capital, no doubt, out to see if they could find me.
His voice was soft and clear, his articulation precise. He never moved. He stood still, and with almost lifeless qualities while speaking at first, but then he turned and walked away from them, slowly. He continued.
Well, you were successful. I am here at the river's edge to seek assistance. Looking into the water of the Enden River can give any common traveler guidance. However, it is not the most reliable source of comfort. I know of certain men who have been driven to madness for staring at it too long. Then again, I am no man, not anymore.
At this he stopped, turning back toward the edge of the river. Garth and Jonathan had no idea they were this close to their destination, so why had the governor given them 2 days to complete such a small task? For almost 30 seconds the group stood. No one moved, and no one blinked. 12 other Deadmen stood by their leader, but the men from the capital took no notice of them, for they never moved their eyes from Anton Schritz. Schritz bent low and inched toward Garth's face. Garth turned his head away, gasping in terror. Anton froze at this spot, content with the fear he was causing. After a moment he moved once again, this time to gaze at Jonathan. Jonathan didn't react the same way. Instead, a small amount of courage was slowly building in him. He stood up and shouted, "Release us!" Within a second, Anton returned to his tall stature and either slapped Jonathan or shoved his head away from him. Garth couldn't tell which. "Down!" screamed the awful creature. Jonathan screamed in surprise. It was the last sound he made. He collapsed onto the ground. A dark red mark stretched across his cheek. It was a slap, Garth realized, from a demon from hell. Garth began to shake. It wasn't cold, but the presence of pure evil made his breath show.
How dare you stand against me? Do you not realize who I am? I am a demon, a nightmare. I am your worst dream come alive. Fear me.
All at once, the gravity of the situation hit Garth. This was no story being told by his grandfather, who had long since passed, that Garth could beg him to stop telling before they retired to bed for the evening. This was happening. Right here, right now. Wondering if anything could change his fate, Garth remained on the ground, unable to move.
Ah, you are indeed a wiser man for not standing up to me. But there is a great difference between a wise man and a coward, which you are. I know what you are thinking. You seek the knowledge that I have. You want to know how I returned from the land of the dead. Well, shall I divulge to you exactly why I have returned to see your small, uneasy face?
Anton returned to his bent position right next to Garth's face, waiting for an answer. Garth, however, would not suffer the same fate as Jonathan. He nodded quickly, still looking away. Anton was pleased.
Very well. I will begin with my death. I'm sure everyone in the capital knows how I died. I fell down to that hellish fire pit. I couldn't describe, even now, just how terrifying it truly was. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't bear it. I, the great Anton Schritz, begged the devil to take my soul and rip it to shreds. But he refused and ordered further torture. Then, one day, I found a gaping hole in the wall between reality and the world of death. I walked out and was transformed into what you see now. No longer could I just be heralded as a man resurrected to finish what he started. Now I could show the world of life just what it meant to be a hound of hell. The devil appeared to me, and he saw what had occurred. He knew not to interfere with my newly given strength. I promised to do his bidding back on Winterlone, to kill and rule supreme. If evil would be word up here, I could remain. And to make the task end in quick haste, he gave me 12 followers.
At this point, Anton acknowledged his accompanying men, bringing out his black hand from the cloak. This was the first time Garth saw them, since his attention was focused entirely on Anton. What he saw was nothing that relieved him of any tension or fear. All 12 of his fellow hounds of hell were dressed in similar fashion, though some deadmen had differing heights and weights. A couple looked skinnier than others, and 2 were slightly hunched over, signifying age. None, however, differed in their gaze, which now was fixed solely on Garth. He quivered further in his spot, knowing that the end was probably near. Now Anton continued.
Together, we have started small, but we will rise. We will rise.
Garth, slightly confused, was still now. He may not have believed what he heard, but he definitely believed what he saw. Anton decided now was the time to show his captive the terror under the hood. As he slowly revealed his hideous face, Garth raised his head to look back at the evil that was before him. But what he saw was beyond evil. It was a vile gathering of skin tissue stitched together from decaying flesh to form something that would resemble a corpse's appearance. He had thin, black eyebrows, but that was the only hair on his body. His eye color matched the eyebrows and made Garth shiver just thinking about that small detail. Sharp, filed teeth began to fill the void of Anton's mouth as he saw the terror come into Garth's face once more. Next he grabbed Garth's hands and turned them over. While he did this, another deadman checked the hands of Jonathan. Whatever they saw on Jonathan's hands discouraged the other deadman, but this was not the case for Garth. Suddenly Anton was shoving Garth over toward the river. It was about 10 paces away, but Garth got the message. Not turning back, he walked over toward the edge and stopped. Anton strode behind him and placed his hand on his lower back. The bony, sharp hand worked its way up Garth's spine until it was level with his shoulders, stopped for a moment, then finally moved again to the back of his head. With a harsh shove, Garth's head lurched forward and stopped just a few inches from the water's surface. But it wasn't his own reflection he saw in the water. It was the reflection of a man he had briefly met a few nights ago, in a place far from here. Anton's shrill cackle filled the night air for a moment. Then he picked Garth back up and motioned for him to go back to where he was before. Garth complied.
Yet again, the Enden River does not fail to show the desired results.
It slowly dawned on Garth exactly what had happened. He had just doomed this man's fate. A small tear rolled down his left cheek as he stopped. This was why Anton had kept him alive. He had forgotten the Mainman Oath scar on his right hand, which ousted him. After a moment, Anton spoke again.
And now the time has come for your demise.
And the smile continued.
Zeno.
One of his followers, an aged one from what Garth could tell, who was a little shorter and with black feet, stepped up to Garth, a knife in his hand. His feet, like Anton's, were bare. His hood was still up. He only moved his legs, not his hands. In his final conscious moments before pain overtook him, confusion set in. Garth questioned Anton's allowing one of his compatriots, not Anton himself, to kill him. He was only left to wonder why this was the case. Garth was struck with a sharp pain in his abdomen that seemed to hurt more once the blade left his body. He cried out at least 3 times before the blade struck again, this time closer to his heart rather than in his stomach. He was dead soon after, blood flowing openly from his fatal wounds. Zeno retracted his half-blade one last time and stared at the wounded man. As Garth finally died, Anton turned to his surrounding followers and said,
Gentlemen, I believe I have done enough searching here. A plan has formed in my mind. I now know the way. Come, company. Our work here is done.
Together, the 13 demons moved away from the bodies. The 300 men from the capital, if they ever did make their way into the forest, would never find them. Instead, the few crows that resided on the outskirts of the forest, who had fled with Anton's presence, could return once he had left, and later spot their next meal as they flew overhead later that day. The murder of crows would peck at the 2 bodies for food, until none remained.